Hey YouTube, today I'm going to walk you through 5 big tips to help improve your weight training. So if you're relatively new to training, or you're a beginner to intermediate, or you're struggling to see results from within the gym, these 5 big tips are going to help make sure you're doing everything you can to get the best results possible. Whether your goal is fat loss and you're trying to retain muscle mass, or whether your goal is trying to build muscle mass, these 5 tips are going to go a long way and help you get optimal results. Being a coach and having worked with people for 6-7 years, working within a gym as well, I've seen people make these mistakes and not make sure they're doing these 5 things. So listen up, and by the end of this video, you'll be making sure that you're not making these same mistakes and you're optimizing your weight training. If you do enjoy the video, please drop a like. If you have any questions throughout, throw them down below. I'll get back to you. And if you haven't already, please do go ahead and subscribe, because it helps me out a ton and it means you can stay up to date with future videos which are going to help you and your goals. Number 1, we need to get our heads around the idea that quality is better than quantity. Now, there's 2 main factors when I'm talking about this. 1, our form and execution needs to be on point. If you're doing more and more training, more and more volume, and your form and execution is poor, not only 1, are you going to be getting very little out of that amount of work that you're doing, but 2, you're also going to run the risk of stuff like injuries. So when you're starting out with your weight training, or if you haven't done this already, actually pulling back and making sure you do this, you need to focus on your form and execution and make sure that is spot on for each and every exercise that you are including in your training. This is going to help make sure that your training is as good as it can be, okay? The better the quality of your training, the better the results you're going to get. Given that retaining muscle mass and building muscle mass is a stimulus-driven process, which means it requires a certain level of stimulus to get the adaptation that we want, the quality of your training, the form and execution of your training is vital. On top of that, which also comes down to quality, is the intensity of our training. Simply put, we need to make sure we're training hard enough. Again, a certain level of intensity is going to ensure that the certain level of stimulus that we're after is being hit. Too many people don't train hard enough and instead will focus on doing more rather than focus on training at a certain level of intensity. And when people actually finally train at this certain level of intensity, they find that they actually don't need to train with as much volume, and they can reduce that volume to improve the quality of their training and get better results for it. To keep this simple, if you think of a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you're completely fresh, 10 being you cannot do a single another rep, across the board in general, you want to be aiming anywhere for 7 to 9 out of 10. So that could feel like at the end of each set, you've maybe only got 1 to 3 reps left in the tank. If you make sure you're trained to that level of intensity where you genuinely only have 1 to 3 more reps in the tank while keeping form and execution strict, you'll be improving your training a lot. Number 2, keep volume low. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make initially is that they start with volume too high and they just try and throw everything in at once. Instead, we want to start with the minimum effective volume. That is the least amount of volume we need to do to still get the response that we're after, to still provide that level of stimulus that we're after. 2 main reasons as to why we want to do this. 1, if you're starting at the minimum effective, over time, when you need to progress things, because progressive overload is going to be important for building muscle mass, you have a large room available to progress things. Whereas if you start up here and throw everything in initially, you have no room for progressions. Secondly, if you do start up here with your volume and the quality of your training isn't as good because you're simply doing too much, you're doing a lot of what people call junk volume. Essentially volume that isn't really giving you much of a return. Whereas if you start down here with lower volume, you're doing very good quality volume that is going to give you a very good return. Now, how much minimum effective volume is going to be dependent on you as an individual. Okay, everyone's different. There isn't a set amount. However, a good benchmark might be 8 to 10 sets per muscle group across the week. You can start there. You can see if you get a good response, and then you can increase it if needed, or vice versa. A good response might be getting a good pump in the muscles that you're training, having slight DOMs, the day after, a couple days after, being able to still progress things on a regular basis. Number 3, a certain level of frequency of training is important. What I mean by this is, it has been shown that training each muscle group 2 to 3 times a week is going to be the best for retaining or building muscle mass. So you want to make sure you're training each muscle group. So that could be chest, back, biceps, triceps, quads, hamstrings, 2 to 3 times each week. Now, depending on how often you can train a week, that's obviously going to determine or have an impact on the split that you're choosing to do. For example, if you can only train 3 times a week, you might want to do full body sessions. If you can train 4 times a week, you might do upper, lower, upper, lower. If you can train 5 or 6 times a week, you might then break those sessions down a little bit more to individual muscle groups. But you just want to make sure that you can train each muscle group 2 to 3 times a week. Number 4, understand that recovery is key. You provide the stimulus when you're training in the gym, but you adapt and you recover outside of the gym. And without the recovery, your training performance is going to take a hit. Okay, without the recovery, you're not going to get the adaptation that you're after. It doesn't matter what you're doing in the gym. You can only train as hard as you can recover. The better your recovery, the better your training performance. The better your training performance, the better the results. So your recovery is just as important, if not more, than your training. And therefore you need to be taking it seriously. So you need to make sure you're looking at and optimizing things like your nutrition, eating a decent amount for you to be able to train and recover well, eating good quality food, sleep being an absolutely massive one. You need to make sure the quality of your sleep is good and consistent. That is going to play a huge role in your goal. Stuff like stress management outside the gym, making sure you're planning in rest days. Just make sure whatever you're doing outside the gym in terms of recovery is on point. And then lastly, more so for building muscle mass, is progressive overload. Okay, as time goes on, you need to be progressing and adding volume in a number of different ways, which you're going to come on to now, to make sure you're providing this progressive overload and getting this adaptation that you're after, which is building muscle mass. So progressive overload and adding volume over time can come from 3 different areas. 1, the weight that you're shifting. Okay, so you can increase the weight that you're shifting over time. That's going to be more added volume. 2, the amount of reps that you're doing. Okay, so let's say you give yourself a rep range for an exercise. Let's say you're doing 8 to 12 reps. One week you might hit 8 reps, the next week you might hit 10, the week after that 11, the week after that 12, and continue. And that's going to be an increase of volume over time. And then thirdly, sets. Okay, so the amount of sets that you're doing for an exercise, for muscle groups, you can take those sets up over time. So progressive overload over time is important if you're looking to build muscle mass. Obviously, do understand that you will not just be able to progress things time and time again. There's obviously going to be a point where you likely have to pull back a little bit to let your body recover and then almost repeat the process. But as long as you are looking at progressive overload over time on a consistent basis, you're going to be doing a good job to help you reach your goal. So there you have it, 5 big tips for your weight training. Make sure you're doing all those things to help you get the best results within the gym. If you did find this video helpful, please drop a like. If you had any questions throughout, throw them down below. I'll get back to you. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because it helps me out a ton and you can keep up with future videos which are going to help you and your goal. Take care and I'll catch you on the next one.